This conference will now be recorded.
Hi everyone, good morning. Today I want to show you REST adapter with get verb. Yesterday in the previous session, we saw REST adapter with post verb. Uh, Similarly, there are different other verbs as well in REST adapter. One of the important verb is get verb. So in get verb, the main purpose of get verb is to fetch the data. Some information. We need to fetch the internal applications information by using the get verb. It is only a standard. It's not mean that technically we cannot do anything else other than search. Okay, you can do any kind of business logic under the get verb, but it is meant for searching the data or fetching the data. Okay, so what I want to do is, in the last example, we created the order. Correct, we created an order by using post verb REST service. A REST service with post verb, we are creating the orders in this table, order info table. Now what I want to do, sorry, some network break. Okay, so in today's example, what I want to do, I want to fetch the orders from this order info table, where I want to set a condition. I want to supply order ID and customer ID as my inputs. So this order ID and customer ID, based on order ID and customer ID, I want to fetch the data from the table. Okay, so that means this is something like a select query with a where clause. So within the where
Sorry,
clause,
Master. Hello.
what happened? What happened?
Master, are you sharing your screen?
Yes. How about others? Guys, are you
Sir,
able to see my screen?
yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
It is visible to us.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Venki, you can rejoin.
Okay, sir.
Okay, yeah. So, so what we want to do, we are trying to write a select statement, whereas we are passing order ID and customer ID as where class and fetch the order information. This is what we want to do. Okay, so let me write the requirement. I want to create a REST web service which can search order info record where it matches with order ID and customer ID. Where it matches order ID and customer ID. Order ID and customer ID, I want to supply as input parameters, and I want to get the order info record as my output parameter. So that means this can be your output. This is the output. This is the output format we are expecting. Okay, and the input format, I want to supply order ID and customer ID as input, order ID and customer ID as input, but I don't want to supply it as a JSON or as an XML. I don't want to supply input as JSON or as XML. I want to supply my input as input parameters. I told you right in the previous session, there are two types of parameters, uh, query parameter and template parameter. Query param and template param. Okay, so I want to show you intentionally, I want to show you order ID I will use as query parameter, customer ID I will use as template parameter. So guys, I will show you one example. Suppose this is the URL. Suppose if this is the URL. Okay, so query parameter always starts at the end of the URL with a question mark. See this question mark. You can give anything as a query parameter. Let's say order ID is equal to something 1001 and customer ID is equal to 2001. Something like this. You can provide query parameters, and multiple query parameters you can provide. Okay, here we have order ID as one query parameter, customer ID as another query parameter. But now I don't want two query parameters. What I want is I want to supply customer ID as a template parameter. So template parameter is something part of the URL. Part of the URL. I mean, anywhere in the URL, you can supply your template parameter. Suppose I mean here I can say customer ID. See this? In this URL, we have customer ID as template parameter, order ID as query parameter. So at runtime, when you want to test this program, what we need to do, we need to supply the value for template parameter, something like this. So I mean, instead of providing customer ID, this is how you need to provide. So this is the value of customer ID as a template parameter. It is part of URL. See, we are not using customer ID is equal to 2001. We are simply directly providing the value of template parameter here. Okay, but for query parameter, it's a key value pair. Query parameter is key value pair. You have to provide key. Order ID is the key is equal to 1001 is the value. Okay, but for template parameter, you don't need to provide the key directly. You need to provide the value. Any questions? So not only this one, guys, you can, it's your choice how you want to provide the template parameter. Let me give you one more example. Suppose I'm not interested to provide the customer ID here. There is no restriction. You can provide it somewhere. Okay, let's say in middle of the URL, I will provide my customer ID. So this is also okay, but how you want to define, you first decide. Okay, something like this. If this is the URL, here customer ID will come as 2001. Is it clear? So I mean, it's your choice how you want to provide the URL. I just took an example. This is not the correct URL of our service. I took just an example. Any questions as of now? Any questions? So it means we want to supply two parameters, customer ID and order ID as input parameters. One parameter is query parameter, another parameter is template parameter. And remember, we can supply either one or more than one query parameter and template parameters. There is no limit. Suppose here I want to provide one more parameter. Okay, T1 param. You can supply any number of parameters you want. Okay, suppose here if you see this one and ABC is equal to 1 2 3, something like this. You can supply any number of parameters in a URL. That can be multiple query parameters, multiple template parameters. It's just your choice. Okay, as per your requirement, you can supply any number of parameters. So now what I want to do now, for my program, I need to supply order ID and customer ID as input parameters, but not as JSON or as XML. I want to provide them as parameters. One as template parameter, one as query parameter. I will show you how to do this configuration. Okay, there are two things we need to do here. Number one, this is REST adapter configuration with the two parameters. Okay. Number two, we want to fetch the data from the table, right? For that, we need a DB adapter. We want to fetch the data from the table. For that, we need the DB adapter. This time, I want to show you how to use a select operator, select condition, select query. Okay. Anyway, let me go to our program. I will configure a table DB adapter. I will configure a DB adapter on the table. We already have the table, right? I will say order search. Order search. I want to search the records. Use the DB connection. Use the DB connection and also provide the JNDI. Say okay. There is only one new step here. See guys, as of now we are using the operations, right? Insert, delete, update. Here we have a select operation. Of course, you can use this select operation. You can use this select operation, no doubt. But what I want is I want to go for execute pure SQL. So execute pure SQL option is you can write any query. Directly you can type the SQL query. I will show you. Okay, click next. So here see, you can write the SQL query. Select what we want, select star from order underscore info. This is our table where where what we want what is our condition? The table
Customer ID is equal to.
order ID and customer ID as the where clause, right?
Yes, sir.
Order ID is equal to, at runtime I want to provide the order ID. I will say p underscore order ID. Okay, p underscore order ID and customer ID. See, customer ID is equal to p underscore cust ID. Okay, done. So don't provide any double any special characters like commas. So generally, if you write a SQL statement, you need to end with a semicolon, correct? So here you don't need to write any semicolon in the query. Okay. So you can write any query, guys, not just select statement. You can write any query. Observe this: an XSD generated here. And when you are writing the where statement, okay, see, this is very important. Let me copy this SQL statement. So when you are writing the query here, order ID is equal to, so you need to write here this symbol, double plus. See this in asterisk, people call it as asterisk, right? Asterisk symbol. So this means we are telling the query these two are runtime parameters. These two are runtime parameters. At runtime, we will supply the value by using the program. Okay, done. If you observe here, immediately an XSD generated. If you see this, this is request XSD, this is request XSD, and this is response XSD. You can observe. Okay, so based on the query, see here I used a star symbol. That means it is trying to fetch all the fields from the table. The table contain how many fields the table contain. Every field is displayed here. Suppose I don't want all the fields, you can change the query. Select order ID, comma customer ID, comma customer name, something like that. You can change the query. Okay, it's just a simple select statement. Only something new here is the where class, parameters in the where class. I want order ID and I want to supply it at runtime. So this is the parameter I need to supply at runtime. Okay, that's it. So our query is ready. Click next, 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 and finish. Done. We are ready with a new DB adapter which can fetch the record from the table with the help of where clause. In the where clause, we have a dependency on two parameters. Okay, we are good. Now, I want to implement the get operation in a REST adapter. Either you can utilize the same REST adapter or you can configure a new REST adapter. It's your choice. So I want to go with the existing REST adapter. Let's edit this REST adapter. Okay, here I already have a resource path, right? So I want to create a new one. What I want to do, order slash get. Okay, order slash get. So I want to pass one template parameter, that is customer ID. I want to pass a template parameter, that is customer ID, and I want to pass a query parameter, that is order ID. Order ID is equal to some, give some data, 101. I said 101. Okay, something. It is a sample URL only. This is the structure. It is, we are taking one example of the URL. Okay, see, this is the URL constructed here. This is the URL constructed. Take a backup of it. Go back and see, this is the URL we are going to construct. Okay, we need to replace all the keywords. Okay, now say okay. Done. So our resource URL is ready. Our resource path is ready. We need to configure the binding. Just select this. See, there are two, right? So you need to select the proper one and then click plus icon. Okay. Once you click plus icon, you can see operation name. I will say get operation. Okay, or search operation, some naming convention. Okay, search operation, and HTTP verb is get verb, and observe here we need to define the XSD. We need to define the XSD first. Go to this define schema. Okay, here construct the wizard. Run the wizard to construct the XSD. Click next. You can give some naming convention to this XSD. I will say search order request. Search order request. I'm just giving some naming convention. It is not mandatory to follow the same name. You can give beautiful names. Okay, right. Click next. So guys, how you want to construct the XSD? This time our input is a URL sample. In URL, we will have template parameters and query parameters, the combination we are using here, correct? Okay, I selected URI sample, click next and give the sample. We already have a sample here, right? We already copied it. Let's replace the keywords, localhost 7101, and this is the default partition. So use it as the sample, copy this, use it as the sample, paste it here. Okay, we are going to build an XSD, so provide the target namespace. Practice.com. You can give some naming convention here. Okay, I will say order get search. That's it. I mean, its target namespace is user defined, so anything is fine. And I want to go with the root element default naming convention. I'm fine with that. Okay, click next. Once you click next, it will build an XSD for you with 2 input parameters. Click next. See here, it is going to build an XSD for you with 2 input parameters, order ID and customer ID. Say next and finish. Now you can see the parameters. There are multiple parameters. You remove everything. We can configure by your own. Okay, done. I just browsed. I just created an XSD, and you need to configure the URL parameters. Click plus icon. If you click plus icon, it will ask you your parameter names. One is order ID is my parameter. Order ID is my parameter, and see the type of the parameter. Order ID is the query parameter. Customer ID is the template parameter. So let me select query and expression. So here you need to select the XSD structure. In the XSD structure, which element you want to use. In the XSD structure, I have order ID. See order ID, and then we need to configure template parameter that is customer ID, and it is a template parameter, and go to expression, go to message request, customer ID. So what it means, what we are doing here, in the input you will receive customer ID parameter as template parameter. That value store into this part of the XSD. I mean, if any variable created for this XSD, in that variable store this data in the element which is called as customer ID. Similarly, if you receive an order ID in the input as query parameter, store the data in this element under the XSD related variable. Are we good? This is how the input parameters we will store in an XSD structure. Done. Now go to response. So response, what kind of format we are expecting? This format, right? This format of response I am expecting. For this format, of course, you can use this JSON. You can use this JSON and build an XSD, no doubt. But already we have an XSD for the same structure we created in the previous session, right? For the post operation input XSD, which is for the same JSON. Okay, I want to reuse the XSD. I don't want to build another one. I want to reuse. Just click on the browse icon. You can see the XSDs create order request. So this is the XSD I want to reuse. Done. So this we used in the post verb service. Now I am reusing it in the get verb response. Done. Okay. So my response, I'm expecting the response in JSON format, and input is only parameters, nothing else. Say okay. That means, see here, my REST adapter, it is supporting 2 resource URLs. Okay. Of course, you can configure any number of resource URLs. There is no limitation. It is something like your WSDL with multiple operations. A WSDL is allowed to configure multiple operations, right? In the same way, REST adapter is allowed to configure multiple resource path, multiple context path. Okay, say finish. Done. So we updated our REST adapter. Let's see. What happened? Is it configured? Not configured. It should show two operations to us. Let me reopen the service. Okay. See here, create operation which we created in the previous session, and search operation is we created just now. Okay, two operations. Now go to your people. See guys, I started my people with the on message branch, right? This is the reason. I want to go with the second on message branch for my get operation. Okay. Let's create the second on message branch. It is loading. My JDO got stuck. Give some time. Meantime, I will log in into Enterprise Manager. Taking too much time. Okay, so now what I want to do here, once the people, we create the second on message branch in the people. Okay, it's a regular configuration. I mean, we need to configure the second operation in the on message branch. I mean, second on message branch, and then internal business logic you can design like calling the new DB adapter. Okay, where is the new DB adapter? We did not create the binding yet. Create the binding with the new DB adapter. Okay, done. Now go to your people process. Suppose now you can see here you have a new on message branch. I just created a new on message branch by using this icon. If you click this icon, a new on message branch created. We know this, we used it multiple times. Okay, so go to the second on message branch, configure the partner link, order a service. Okay, here you need to make sure what operation you are selecting. I want to go with search operation. Okay, and create a variable, search operation input variable. Done. Similarly, I want a reply activity. This time, search operation, reply activity with search operation. You can create the variable. I will say search operation output variable. Done. Okay, now I need to configure the invocation with DB adapter. Invocation with DB adapter order search. So I will name it as invoke search order. Okay, invoke search order. Create the input variable. Invoke search order. Invoke input variable. Similarly, we want create search order. Invoke output variable because it's a search operation. It's a search operation. That means you have to pass the where parameters as input and the result as the output. Okay, so we need input and output. We need input and output. Apply. Okay, done. Drag drop and assign activity before invocation. Do the required mapping. That means we need to supply some input parameters. We need to supply input parameters, right? So what are they? Order ID and customer ID. See here, P underscore order ID, P underscore customer ID. These are the parameter names we supplied in the query. If you see the query, see this part. P underscore order ID, P underscore customer ID. Intentionally, I provided P as the naming convention, P underscore parameter underscore. Okay, it's not mandatory to provide this naming convention, just to differentiate. Order ID is the table field. P order ID is the parameter which we want to supply in the adapter. Okay, right. So these two fields I want to supply. How we can supply? Search operation input variable. Search operation input variable. You can get the order ID. Copy the order ID, and we also get the customer ID. Copy the customer ID. Done. Now we are able to supply the data to DB adapter. And then what we are expecting? We are expecting a response. That response I want to copy into my output variable. So this is the response, invoke search output variable, which contains the DB record, and I want to copy this into output variable of my people process. So copy the data. All required fields. It's simple mapping. There is nothing complex here. Whatever data we are receiving from the table, that I want to copy from this, from source variable. Okay, right. So our service is ready. We can deploy the service and we can test our service. See, we have only one service with two endpoints. One is post. One is you are
Sir, your voice breaking.
as a complex operation we can use combination to two REST URLs we configure, right? Let me show you. So here we want to test that one. If I want to test the URL, deployment failed. Any question from anyone? No? Okay. Let's wait for the deployment. Once the deployment completed, we can do a test. Let's go to the deployed composites list. Order REST service, right? This is the one we deployed. Order REST service. Meantime, check is the deployment completed or open it. Not it. Oh, it's taking some time. Stop the deployment. Okay, our deployment finished. No need to terminate it. Now just go and refresh your enterprise manager. Refresh your enterprise manager and see the test button. Whether the endpoints reflected or not, we can check here. See here the resources. We can see two resources. That means our deployment reflected properly. Okay, done. Let me test my service by using Postman. We have a tool, right? Postman is one of the tool. Where is it? Okay, I think I need to start it. Let me start the Postman. So download the Postman free version from internet, from Google. It's a very simple installation like SOAP UI. Just download the setup file and double click next, next, next. That's it. I mean, there is no configuration. You can simply start your Postman application. Of course, you can test your REST services even by using SOAP UI. Okay, any one tool is enough, but Postman is most widely used and most famous. Let me start the Postman. Meantime, you can test it from SOAP UI. Let me do that. Create a REST project. So we have the URL, right? We have the URL handy. Use this URL. Use this URL. Paste it here. Say OK. Done. You can see a REST project here. REST project. If you want, you can rename this. You can give a proper naming convention. I want to give REST get order. Okay, some name. That's it. There is no big story behind the naming convention. It's just a name. Done. And you can observe here. You can observe here the method. What verb we want to test? We want to test the get verb. Okay, and this is the endpoint. And you can see the resource path. You can see the resource path. And guys, see, this is the template parameter. This is the query parameter. And you can see here already template parameter and query parameter configured, and the style. See the style, template parameter and query parameter. And you can give some value, customer ID. I will say 1001, and order ID. I will say 2001. Do we have some order like this? Check the table. Let me check the table whether I have any data in the table or not, because otherwise we don't get the data, right? Select star from order underscore info. This is my table. Let me check what data it contains. Okay, you can see 1001, 1002, order ID 1001, and customer ID 2001. Let's check this record. Okay, order ID 1001, order ID 1001, and customer ID 2001. Okay, submit your request. Done. Once you submit the request, the content you are trying to view can be converted as JSON. Okay, something wrong. URL not found. 404 not found. Why? Okay, let me change the URL. This part. Submit the request. Why it is saying URL not found? Are we using the correct URL? This is the one, right? Order ID, customer ID.
Yes, sir. We are using the same.
No spelling mistakes, right? Local host 7101. Get customer ID, order ID. Everything is correct. Let me try it in the Postman. Let me create a new request. New request. Use the URL here. Okay. And body, there is no body. We are not supplying any data in body. Go to parameters, the parameter section, order ID. Let me say 1001 is the order ID. And then the second parameter is customer ID, right? So customer ID, we need to supply something like this in Postman. In Postman, what we can do, remove the curly braces and use colon symbol. Okay, once you use colon symbol, see directly the parameter come here, customer ID, and provide the value 2001. Okay, there is no body section here. We have no body section. Done. Let's submit the request. We'll see. Not found. URL not found error. Any mistake I did or what? Let me check that from the enterprise manager. So in enterprise manager, go to the second URL, order get, right? So the same URL we are using, order get. I don't know. Let me check. Anyway, in enterprise manager, I'm trying to test it. So it's loading. input arguments. Okay, we got the order ID as query parameter, customer ID as template parameter. See, if you once you select the resource path, this will load the request. So enterprise manager has the ability, right? It will give you a graphical view. Let's check. Order ID is 1001, customer ID is 2001. Okay. Test the web service. Okay, we got the response. So, but why I'm not able to test it from outside? Let's check. Anyway, first check this URL. I'm able to test it from enterprise manager. Check the instance. So our instance is good, right? This is the REST adapter, which is accepting the input and went to people process. People process is calling DB adapter. Inside people process, what we are doing, we are calling the DB adapter with input parameters, order ID and customer ID. Of course, here you can see the request as well. Service request. You can see the service request. We got the parameters in XML format because we defined an XSD. Based on that XSD, our input parameters constructed as an XML, and then we are calling the this part. Okay, DB adapter. Any question till now? Any question? No. Let me quickly check why it is not working from here. There is nothing we need to configure here. Template parameter we have, resource path. Okay, there is one more thing you can also check. So guys, get verb URL. You can test even from a browser. You can test it only get verb. I mean, you cannot test the post verb. Okay. I mean, see, this is I provided the data in the URL 1001 and 2001. This URL you can directly use it in a browser if you want. But post verb you cannot test like that. Not only SOA, any technology post verb service, post verb rest service you cannot test in browser, but get verb rest service you can test in browser. Any technology. Keep it a note. Done. Localhost 7101 SOA infra resources. So it is saying URL not found. Why? Is there any mistake in our URL? This is the URL, right? This is the URL we received. This is localhost :7101 and our partition name is default. Are we doing anything wrong? Our partition name is default. Okay. What's the difference? Order REST service, it is showing version number, that must be fine. Okay, let's use this host name. Instead of localhost, let me try with this. I don't know, it should not, localhost must not disturb the flow, but anyway, let me give it a try. Okay, this is 1001. This is 2001. Okay, submit a request. No, I will check this, guys. I don't know. URL is not accessible outside server. Maybe some network issue in my machine or what. I need to check. But the way how you need to test is you get the URL You get the URL from the REST service. If you go to this, copy this URL. This is the correct URL only. Copy this URL, replace the keywords, and search it from browser, from SOAP UI, from Postman, and of course you can test it from Enterprise Manager as well, what we tested here, right? So you can do all this stuff. You can do all this stuff in different ways. You can test the REST service. Anyway, you can see the response here when I'm testing. So it's nothing wrong with the program. Program is good. Maybe some network issue in my machine. I'm not able to access the server through browser. I will check that. I will check that what went wrong. Okay. Any questions from today's session? Any questions? Let me stop the recording.